As human civilization flourished, so did infectious disease. Large numbers of people living in close proximity to each other and to animals, often with poor sanitation and nutrition, provided fertile breeding grounds for disease. And new overseas trading routes spread the novel infectious far and wide, creating the first global pandemics. Nowadays, coronavirus is continuing its spread across the world, with more than 5.2 million confirmed cases in 188 countries. 300,000 people have lost their lives. Throughout human history, there have been a number of pandemics of diseases, and here are the worst of them. In 5th place of our top 5 worst pandemics of all time is Plague of Justinian, with 25 to 100 million deaths. Plague of Justinian, 541 to 542 AD, was a pandemic that afflicted the Byzantine Empire and especially its capital Constantinople, as well as the Sasanian Empire and port cities around the entire Mediterranean Sea, as merchant ships harbored rats that carried fleas infected with plague. Some historians believe the Plague of Justinian was one of the deadliest pandemics in history, resulting in the deaths of an estimated 25 to 100 million people during 2 centuries of recurrence, a death toll equivalent to as much as half of Europe's population at the time of the first outbreak. In the 4th place is HIV/AIDS, with 35 million deaths. The first AIDS clinical report appeared on July 5, 1981, in which there were 5 cases of infection in the United States. By the end of 1982, 771 cases had already been recorded in the country. 618 victims of the virus died in the same year. Today, approximately 40 million people remain infected with HIV. Until that time, 35 million patients had died from AIDS after they discovered the virus. At first, it was believed that homosexual men became his victims, but later it became apparent that its effect is much wider. HIV can spread through infected blood and other fluids in the human body. There are currently no drugs or vaccines against the virus, although there are therapeutic methods that can slow down the development of the disease and allow patients to live a normal life. In 3rd place is Spanish flu, with 50 to 100 million deaths. In 1918, when the world was just recovering from World War I, a new strain of the virus appeared, H1N1. It infected 500 million people in all corners of the planet, even in very distant ones. The total number of deaths reached at least 50 million, and according to some estimates, to 100 million. In 1919 to 1920, schools and theaters were closed, and some of them were used as morgues. The source of the virus was a field camp in France. However, the flu is still called Spanish. The fact is that in that era, newspapers in neutral Spain were not burdened by the censorship of wartime. Therefore, they quickly began to write about the outbreak of the deadly virus. It disappeared as suddenly as had arisen. It is believed that the Spanish flu has mutated into less deadly strains. However, this can certainly not be said. The Spanish flu outbreak is considered the deadliest epidemic of all time. In 2nd place is Black Death, with 75 to 200 million deaths. Distributed in Europe and Asia in the 14th century, it was one of the most contagious pandemics in the history of mankind, which claimed the lives of approximately 75 to 200 million people. Historians are convinced that its spread began in China. The virus crossed the Silk Road and appeared first in the Crimea and then throughout Europe. The world population at the time was about 475 million people. The Black Death has reduced this figure to about 350 million. It took mankind 200 years to restore the population level. And finally, in the 1st place of our top 5 is smallpox, with 300 to 500 million deaths. The causative agent was the only human disease that was completely eradicated. Thanks to the vaccination program that began in the 1960s, smallpox killed around 300 million people in the 20th century alone. The virus was ancient. His traces were found in tissue samples of mummies of ancient Egypt. Until the 18th century, approximately 400,000 Europeans died from it annually, and even more remained blind or disfigured. History shows that smallpox has even become the first biological weapon. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe to see more interesting videos.